Thank you all for joining us. Evening for some of you, early morning for others, as you can see in Naomi's background. So today we are doing our first in a series of webinars by the Global Greens Climate Working Group, this one on loss and damage. And from where I come from in Canada and also in the United States and in Australia and New Zealand and some other areas around the world, we usually begin these meetings with a land acknowledgement. So I'd like to start with that. If everybody could take a moment to consider the lands that they're on and the traditional stewards of those lands, the people who were here long before us. I myself am a settler. Where I'm from, the land is the traditional people from these lands had been brought together by the dish with one spoon wampum covenant. And in this covenant is the idea that the land itself is the dish, and everybody eats from that same dish. And not only that, but they eat from it with one spoon. So they share that spoon, and each person takes what they need and passes the spoon along to the next person, and they take what they need. So the idea is the same as what we have here today. We have invited speakers from all around the world, different areas where we all share one land, and we all have responsibility to that land. Last year at COP27, loss and damage was a huge hot topic, and many promises were made. Here we are 1 year later, and the world, all around the world, different areas have suffered from many different types of climate crises and climate disasters. And that is why for this, our very first webinar series leading up to COP28, we have invited speakers from the 4 federations of the Global Greens, each one speaking on 4 different climate disasters, from dryness to fires to floods to incredible storms. And we're going to be speaking on how these climate disasters have affected our world just in this last year and what it means for the promises from COP27 and loss and damage. So the format for today, we're going to have the 4 speakers speak. We're going to start with Sylvia and then move on to Thomas and Naomi and then Joyance and Namo. Each one will be speaking for 8 to 10 minutes. And then we are going to open up the floor for the attendees to ask their questions for any or all of our speakers. If English is not your first language and it would be helpful to you, you can click on at the bottom of Zoom under more, you can click on captions and choose the language that would be easiest for you to follow for the captioning. So I'm going to begin with the first introduction, and I will be introducing each speaker as they come up. So once again, our first speaker is going to be Sylvia Zamboni from the European Green Parties, that federation, European Federation. Sylvia graduated in philosophy and is an environmental journalist. She's also a member of the regional Emilia-Romagna Parliament as a representative of the Italian Greens, and she's the international secretary of the Italian Greens. And today she will be speaking to us about the Emilia-Romagna floods. So thank you very much for joining us, Sylvia. I know that you're taking time out of your parliamentary duties to do it.
Thanks for this introduction, and thanks also for inviting me to this webinar. I must apologize in advance because I will have to leave the webinar because of another attendance in commission here by the regional parliament. As you already said, I will speak on the flood in Emilia-Romagna. I ask you please to upload my presentation from the first slide, if possible, because this is the last one. Okay. So in the month of May 2023, in 6 days, I mean from the beginning of May, the first 3 days, and from 15 to 17 May, it rained for a total of 80 hours over a land area of 16,000 square kilometers. So in a few days, 4.5 billion cubic meters of water was spilled on this land, particularly on the eastern part of our region. Our region is a land, flat land in the northern, mountainous land in the south, and on the east we have the sea, Adriatic Sea. Emilia-Romagna, in 1 year, just to compare how much water was spilled, in Emilia-Romagna in 1 year consumes 1.54 billion cubic meters of water for civil, industrial, and irrigation use. That means that in these few days, 6 days, more than 3 times of the total consumer water were spilled on particularly the eastern part, that is Romagna. And unfortunately, we had also some people who lost their life. 15 people lost their lives as a result of the flooding. This damage has an impact also from an economic point of view. The flood damage will also touch the national economy's performance, because Emilia-Romagna was the region with the highest increase in GDP. This is especially true for the damage suffered by the agricultural sector. 42% of the utilized agricultural area was affected by the flood events. Romagna is an area with a very strong agribusiness vocation. So we are among the highest agricultural producer in Italy. And we have also some very special product. As you know, the Parmesan cheese. The flood also had dramatic consequences for animals in the many intensive farms we have in our region. Thousands of chickens and pigs drowned as they tried to escape from the cage that were too narrow, and they were overwhelmed by the water. The Apennine Mountains are wounded by thousands of landscape as a result of the flood, affecting 74 municipalities. There are over 1,000 major ones of these landslides in the different provinces, as you can see in the slide. 772 municipal and provincial roads closed because they were damaged, and there are still some communities who are totally isolated. The recorded peak of the evacuees in May 20, so at the end of the major flood, with 36,000 people forced to leave their homes. Activated for this purpose 54 first reception centers, obtaining gyms, schools, civic centers, and convents. 52 accommodation facilities by hotels and agritourism. Firefighters involved were more than 1,000 and implemented more than 11,000, so almost 12,000 intervention with 350 vehicles. So that can make us understand how deep were the damage to our territory. The best aspect of this tragedy was the presence of civil defense volunteers. So almost 14,000 people responded to the emergency call. The estimate, so translated in economic in financial damage. The estimate of the total amount of damage suffered by the Emilia-Romagna system is almost 9 billion euros, so 8.8 billion euros. There are urgent and necessary intervention to secure the territory by the end of the summer because the new rain typical for autumn arrives. And this intervention have a cost of approximately 1.8 billion euros. And we speak of almost 6,000, so 885 intervention. The number of the damaged private buildings is around 2 milliards, so 2 billions 182 euros. The buildings who have been damaged are over 70,000. The enterprises potentially damaged are over 14,000. The damaged farms are about 12,000. Such intense rainfall concentrated in short periods has affected, is the next slide, has affected various parts of Italy in recent years, causing numerous floods. Since 2013, we have had 29 floods, almost 3 for each year. A phenomenon that coexists in this climate crisis with long periods of high temperature and drought. This was also the case for the last flood. We had some months of intensive drought, and when the rainfall so intense came, the land was so dry that it couldn't absorb the rain. This was also the cause of the flood. The climate crisis is a global phenomenon, but Italy, so heavily affected and vulnerable, is not doing its part to address it. Climate crisis deniers, we are also represented in our parliament, unfortunately, and some also in the regional parliament where I have been elected, have a great political influence in Italy, and they continue to obstruct and delay the adoption of hard-hitting measures, economic and fiscal measures, to accompany the transition and priority climate change adaptation measures. After a long environmental assessment phase, we are still waiting for the government to adopt the National Climate Change Adaptation Plan. And we still don't have a national law to combat soil consumption either. And we know that heavy soil consumption can facilitate the consequences of intensive rainfall. In Italy, so we don't have a climate law, although we belong to the European Union, who has approved a climate law a couple of years ago, but we don't still have translated it into our Italian law. We don't have the National Climate Change Adaptation Plan, and we don't have a law to combat soil consumption. Coming to Emilia-Romagna, in December 2020, so in the first year of this legislative period, Emilia-Romagna regions signed the Jobs and Climate Pact, together with local authorities, trade unions, businesses, school, university, environmental association, the third sector and voluntary sector, profession, chambers of commerce and banks, and so on. The two main objects to achieve, which are contained in the pact, are decarbonization before 2050. So you know that the European law foresees the neutral carbon at 2050. And the other object of this pact is 30%, 100%, so renewable energy by the year 2035. Emilia-Romagna has passed some years ago, and so precisely in 2017, a new regional urban planning law, which has two main objectives: limiting soils consumption and promoting urban regeneration. That means the possibility of reusing areas that have already been urbanized, for example, by recovering and redeveloping the existing. And the other objective of the law is to stop the soil consumption and to contain it within the percentage of 2% within the year 2015. So within the year 2050, there must be no soil consumption. Yet statistics and reports from ISPRA is the Superior Institute for Environmental Protection and Research, so this is a national institute. This, the statistics and reports by ISPRA place Emilia-Romagna still at the top of the national rankings for soil consumption. So although this law, which is really something unique in Italy, but still not working because there is a transitional period to be complete. And so the result of this is that we go on consuming soil.
We're at the 12-minute mark at this point, Sylvia.
I beg your pardon?
We're at 12 minutes now, Sylvia.
12,000. Sorry, I'm going to conclude with the last slide that is on my proposal to, I have presented a resolution which wants to call for a regional citizen assemblies on climate, because without the participation of citizens, not only of enterprises and local authorities, we cannot reach the goal of reducing fossil fuel and reducing all the sources of CO2 emission and other greenhouse gases. Thanks, this is all.
Thank you so much for that, Sylvia. That was a fantastic presentation. And I know that you're in a bit of a hurry. So I would encourage people to put any questions that they have that they do not want to ask later into the Q&A section at the bottom. And you do have a question there. But I know that you won't be able to remain for the Q&A period. So I don't know if you wanted to take
I can leave a collaborator of a member of my staff.
Oh, perfect.
Yes, he is a native English speaker, so his English will be much better than mine, and he also knows the situation very well. So I can introduce him to you, Danny Labriola, and he will substitute me. I have full confidence in his competence.
Thank you very much, Sylvia, and good luck with the vote today. Sylvia took time out to speak with us, even though she has a vote in Parliament today that she has to speak to. So thank you for the wonderful presentation, and the tour through the floods and the damages that were caused, and your mitigation plans as well. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. So moving on to, hello, moving on to our next speaker then. We're going to be going to the Horns of Africa now. Thomas Mariwa is a serial entrepreneur, an author, a poet, and politician, and thought leader with a strong passion for the environment. With successful ventures in various different sectors, Thomas has a deep interest in climate politics. As a person living with disability, Thomas also has taken a keen interest with issues that impact their welfare. Among other ventures, Thomas serves as the CEO of Hella Money, an award-winning Web 3.0 technology company, which won the FinTech of the Year category under the Oracle ICTA Government of Kenya White Box program, and is the lead agency in Government of Kenya blockchain implementation advisory work. Hella Money aims to transform how Africa trades and transacts. Thomas also wears a different hat, serving the national chairman of the Green Congress Party of Kenya. What distinguishes this formation from other Green parties in Kenya is that it serves as the sole delegate organization for the Global Greens in Kenya and East Africa, and is ranked is ranked among the top 10 political parties in terms of membership numbers. Thomas's vision here is to initiate short, mid, and long-term projects and interventions that would lead to measurable impact, shifting political movement around the Green Congress Party and politics in general. So everybody, please join me in welcoming Thomas Mariwa.
Good morning, good afternoon. I realize we are in different parts of the world. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I have prepared a brief statement. Mine is more of a statement, less visual aids to this, but nevertheless, I hope to be able to drive the point home. Statement on the persistent drought on the Horn of Africa by Thomas Mariwa. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed members of the Global Greens Federation, distinguished guests and fellow advocates of a sustainable future, I extend warm greetings and regards from my party, the Green Congress Party of Kenya, as well as our regional and continental cohorts. I appear before you today with a heavy heart, burdened by the profound crisis of unfolding in the Horn of Africa. Crisis that touches upon a multitude of pressing issues, including climate change, climate finance, war, human-wildlife conflict, soil erosion, deforestation, overgrazing, agriculture, and industrial pollution. It is a crisis that transcends borders and affects us all. But it is also a crisis that calls for action, solidarity, and a reset in the way that we address these interconnected challenges. In the past 3 years, a World Bank report stated that an estimated 66.4 million people in the Horn of Africa region, including 10 million children, were forecast to experience food stress, a food crisis, emergency, or famine. Further to this, according to the World Food Programme, the number of people at risk of starvation has increased to 22 million. Additionally, more than 2 million livestock have perished in Kenya alone due to drought, a stark reminder of the devastating impact of this prolonged natural disaster. It is a tragedy that has reverberated through the region, causing untold suffering to the communities that rely on the animals for livelihoods. The Horn of Africa is reeling, and its people are bearing the brunt of this crisis. Climate change, driven by emissions from other continents, is intensifying the drought in the Horn of Africa. It is altering climatic patterns, rendering rainfall unpredictable, and contributing to the environmental degradation of the region. Yet Africa, despite being a minimal contributor to global emissions, shares in the consequences of pollution. This is a profound injustice and a clear case for climate justice action. The time has come for the world to recognize the disproportionate impact of climate change on the most vulnerable regions and communities, and to take decisive action to rectify this injustice. But it doesn't stop there. Our approach to addressing this crisis must undergo a fundamental reset, reimagining of how we tackle these multifaceted issues. We cannot simply continue on the same path and expect different results. Firstly, we must bridge the funding gap that hinders the effective response to this crisis. It is unacceptable that upwards of 60% of funds meant for relief and development in the region are swallowed by administrative costs within some NGOs. It is indeed sad to note that many of the expatriates who run most of these NGOs, as well as some locals, are elitist at best and totally disconnected from the realities on the ground. And yet it is this very elitist cabal that has the technical capabilities to access climate finance as currently formatted. This means that the end users and the implementers are disconnected from the funders, and the narrative is easily hijacked by individuals and entities who may be well-meaning, but are ultimately conflicted. We must demand greater transparency, accountability, and efficiency in the allocation of funds, ensuring that resources reach the communities most in need. Secondly, we must advocate for a shift from rain-fed agriculture to irrigation and adoption of climate-smart agricultural practices. This transition will not only enhance food security, but also safeguard against the ravages of droughts. Sadly, we cannot underestimate the significance of forestry as an area of investment. Around the world, we have seen successful examples of reforestation and sustainable forest management initiatives. These projects provide jobs, sequester carbon, and restore ecosystems. Investing in forestry is a step towards a more sustainable future. Finally, legislative interventions are crucial to achieving these goals. We must enact comprehensive climate resilience laws that prioritize sustainable land use, reforestation, and the transition to climate-smart agriculture. We must also regulate and reduce industrial pollution, protection for both human health and the environment. These laws will serve as the framework for lasting change. In conclusion, the drought crisis in the Horn of Africa is a dire challenge that demands our unwavering commitment. As we approach COP28, let us unite in our call for action. We must address the issues of climate change, climate finance, conflict, environmental degradation, and inefficient NGO spending patterns. Together we can reset our approach. Create positive change, and offer hope to communities enduring the hardships of drought in the Horn of Africa. Let us, as members of the Global Greens Federation, stand united in our pursuit of climate justice and environmental sustainability, and social equity. The world is watching, and history will judge us by our actions. Let our actions today shape a more equitable and sustainable tomorrow for all. I thank you for your attention, and may our collective efforts lead to a brighter future for the Horn of Africa and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, a very impassioned presentation, Thomas. That was fantastic. It was quite amazing to hear from Sylvia speaking on the floods down to Africa, where Thomas spoke of the droughts. And Thomas, I particularly love the way that you spoke of our responsibility to the world, everybody's responsibility all around the world to even the droughts in Africa, because all of it is linked together. So thank you very much for that. So moving on to our next speaker, Naomi Hunter, who is from my country and will be speaking on the Canadian wildfires, something that I'm more familiar with than some of the other climate disasters that we'll be speaking about today. Naomi was born in Turtleford and raised in and around our Saskatchewan boreal forest. She is the longtime owner, farmer with her father of the family's large Haskap berry farm near Birch Hills and leader of the Saskatchewan Green Party. She consistently acts on her deep concern for the ongoing changes affecting farming, care of the land, and the rural communities that make up our province's backbone. Naomi views our increasing forest fire crisis as a human crisis. Lifelong advocate for community, the environment, peace, and social justice, Naomi knows the issues and never ceases working on them. And she comes out on the human side of them every single time. So thank you very much for joining us, Naomi, and I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I am speaking to you today from Treaty 6 territory in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. And yes, I am speaking on a different issue than Thomas and Sylvia, and yet all of us are so connected in that everything that we're seeing around the world is part of the greater climate crisis. This summer, central Canada, where I live, has been the epicenter of what we have been calling the Summer of Fire. Besides leading the Saskatchewan Green Party, I, as Allison told you, am a farmer. At my family farm this summer, where we grow Haskap, which is a boreal forest native fruit, the trees were showing us visible signs of the changing state of the climate. Between the hot, dry spring and the massive amount of smoke in the air from the Canadian forest fire situation, all 5 varieties of Haskap that we grow ripened 3 weeks early and all at once. It's hard to express how difficult this was for my family. We rely on hiring students during summer break to help us harvest the fruit. Because of everything ripening early, the students were still in school and unavailable. As a result of this, we were forced to hire people willing to work on their days off from other jobs. So I had to train new people every single day and was unable to do other work. The orchard was purposefully planted with 5 varieties of Haskap that would ripen naturally one after another. This spring, everything became ripe and needed to be picked in mid-June instead of mid-July. To say that this is unusual is downplaying how strange it all was. And my situation is just one farm. The grain belt of Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta has many farmers. The extreme weather issues this summer have caused problems for all of us. Some of those extreme. Because my farm has always been operating on a permacultural and natural ecosystem organic basis, we fared better than some. Many of the other orchards and farms that I know lost everything this year. This will affect food security in Canada in the years to come. The signs are here for those of us who are connected to the land. We can see climate change unfolding in front of us. We all need to believe our own eyes and look to the natural world. We also need to listen to experts and be prepared to move forward cooperatively with an all hands on deck approach. Here in Canada, some history is needed to explain the current situation we find ourselves in. Back in May of 2016, Fort McMurray, the hub of Canada's petroleum industry and America's biggest foreign supplier, was overrun by wildfire. That multi-billion-dollar disaster melted vehicles, turned entire neighborhoods into firebombs, and drove 88,000 people from their homes in one single afternoon. That fire was the preview of what sadly is now not a unique event in Canada. The Fort McMurray fire trended on news feeds around the world because of its terrifying size and ferocity. 7 years later, it's almost starting to seem like a new normal. That super fire and the many since are the result of the long relationship between the oil and gas industry's ever-accelerating consumption of fossil fuel and our ever-increasing vulnerability to a new kind of super wildfire. One thing many people don't realize about the boreal forest in Canada is that our forests consist of trees that don't get very big or old. That's because they are actually meant to burn down every 50 to 100 years. The circumboreal is a phoenix among ecosystems, literally reborn in fire. It must incinerate to regenerate. In the natural order here, it does so in a random patchwork fashion. Our colossal biome stores as much, if not more carbon than all the tropical forests combined. Our forests and histories managed themselves this way, and fire was part of the cycle of regrowth. So in Canada, in the boreal forest, we are used to seeing forest fire smoke spring to fall. Not a big deal. Smoke has always clouded the horizon where I grow up, spring and summer. That's why the Fort McMurray super fire didn't alarm everyone at first. At first, it seemed like nothing was new. But indeed, and sadly, something new was happening. Winter snowfalls had been below average for many years at that point due to climate change. By May of 2016, the forest floor was dry, like it was late summer already. It was also unseasonably hot that May. Then 5 separate fires ignited around Fort McMurray in one weekend. They morphed into a super fire that changed our view of forest fires forever. Metal melted, concrete spalled. At 900 degrees Celsius, it was unlike anything we could have imagined at that point. Sadly, we are now very used to this. We continue to see year after year high heat, drought conditions, and wind causing fires to rapidly grow into uncontrollable blazes. Now, this year in 2023, our forests have reached a tipping point. At an August 22nd, 2023 media conference hosted by WWA, Natural Resources Canada, research scientist Yann Boulanger said record high temperatures and extreme drought had led to more than 5,800 fires across Canada and burned 15.3 million hectares up to that day. This made this the most devastating fire season in recent memory, and by far. To give a bit of perspective on that, Saskatchewan, where I'm from, that figure equals 91% of Saskatchewan's farmland by area. For comparison, just last year in 2022, 1.6 million hectares burned. This year in 2023, so far, fire season isn't over, 13.4 million hectares have gone up in smoke. This year's coast-to-coast wildfires in Canada have already emitted an estimated 1.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide. That's triple the annual climate pollution from burning fossil fuels in Canada. It's more than the combined emissions from 100 nations. And there are still months of fire season looming ahead. As extreme as this year's wildfire emissions have been, they are just the latest escalation in a multi-decade flood of carbon dioxide pouring out of Canada's managed forestry. And I say managed with parentheses around it. Canada only reports emissions from the parts of the forest that it so-called manages. That is around 2/3 of the forest. Some managed forest areas are reserved for logging, while others are managed for non-timber uses like recreation, water, wildlife, and fire protection. This fire season, Canadian wildfires were causing air quality issues in other countries, some as far away as other continents, especially the USA though, which borders us. This problem now extends beyond Canada's borders. We are in danger of rivaling the Australian bushfires of December and January 2019 and 2020. Those fires resulted in a planetary scale blocking of solar radiation by the smoke. It was similar to that produced by moderate volcanic eruptions. In the 1990s, this pyrochubs, as they were called, were a disturbing novelty. People wondered at them. Now they are a signature of major wildfires. And these events multiply. They are altering in significant and measurable ways the chemical composition of what atmospheric scientists refer to as the stratospheric overworld. We need to act now. It is possible to act in harmony with nature here as and everywhere, but we must make massive changes in how we farm in Canada, how the oil and gas industry is allowed to behave, and our internal forest industry practices. We need to have cooperative climate action government because our climate issues are affecting the rest of the planet. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you so much for that, Naomi. It's really powerful what you were saying, and I think one of the most powerful parts about it is the fires are obviously quite stunning and shocking, but what's leading up to the fire, the results of the fires from the farming that we don't even think about, but also that we had signs for the decade before it was coming, we knew. So it wasn't all about this last year. It was what was leading up to it and the results of it. And you outlined that beautifully. And you outlined the importance of it very beautifully. So thank you very much for that, Naomi. So then moving on, we went from floods to drought to fire, and now we're going to storms, to typhoons. So we're very lucky to have with us representing the Asia Pacific, Joyance Wang and Namo Nofu Pakabal. I hope that I pronounced that correctly. Namo has been committed to Taiwan's indigenous movement for decades. Through protest movements, he has taken on a leadership role in advocating for the rights of indigenous populations, particularly riverine tribes, who have suffered from forced eviction due to typhoons and various climate disasters. After typhoons, he often plays a role in coordinating between the government and the refugees to speed up disaster relief. Joyance has been the co-convener and city councilor candidate for the Green Party Taiwan and is currently the party's secretary general. She completed her LLM in 2022, and her dissertation examined legal issues concerning sexual harassment. She focuses on causes including gender equality, medical disputes, and energy transition, while staying aware of other social issues related to the 6 principles of the Greens. So this presentation is going to be presented jointly. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Namo and Joyance. Thank you.
Okay, just to let everyone know that actually for this topic, I am mainly here to interpret what Namo has to say. And he has been very experienced in issues concerning indigenous people's rights and also climate change. So later, how we're going to go through the presentation is that he's going to speak first in either indigenous language or Chinese, and then I'm going to translate it into English. So it'll be maybe 1 or 2 slides, and after one, and then after one. Okay. All right, then I'm going to let Namo start.
然后萨利嘎嘎及南摩罗沃嘎哥都及这个燕韩尼尼白尼都简报气候变迁及原住民族。那我们台湾呢，在7月跟9月是台风最活跃的时期。那根据我们的中央气象局的统计，在1985年以来至今，我们台湾平均在太平洋生成的台风大概有25.4个，就每年。那身为一个阿美族原住民，我们当然是以自然的生活很紧密，跟我们的祖先一样。我们曾经有一个创世的神话，也是因为大海啸、台风的关系，然后让人类灭亡，那我们又再重生。那在我们阿美族的语言里头呢，我们的台风叫做法利幼斯，法利是风的意思，利幼斯是旋转的意思，所以我们长年以来、千年以来就很常经历到这样的一个风险。
Okay, just a reminder that we actually uploaded our presentation, which is a PDF file. You can download it. So when we are presenting, maybe you can just read through the English script. That might be easier for you to understand. And Namo was saying that we are at the page number 2, which is about statistics that actually averagely there are 25.4 typhoons generated each year surrounding Taiwan. And this statistics is ranging from 1958 to 2021. And the highest number is 37 typhoons in 1964. So it's very natural that for indigenous tribes, like Namo is from Amis, and Amis is actually the biggest tribe in Taiwan, and they are mainly located in eastern Taiwan. They have, in their language, there is a word, falios. And for fali, it means wind, Leos means twist. So combined Leos means typhoon. And this term actually reflects the very powerful force of typhoon. So in their methodology, in their stories, there used to be a tsunami that kind of destroy everything, including lives. And then still people come back to their places and they rebuild their homes. And this is how the culture and attitude reflected by the indigenous communities.
我们认为风是神的作为，然后风是主宰者的居所。所以在我们的生活当中的祭典其实都跟自然有关系。我们在这里举3个例子啊。在我们祭典之前会有其中第一项祭典会叫比西里木子，叫准备建材，然后再来呢会经过比萨鲁玛，就是盖房子，然后直接就进到祭典，就是嘎里西岸。我们可以看到这3个名称上面都说明了我们在面对台风的时候，有岁时记忆上有明确的工作跟事件。那部落是遵照记忆的生活，遵照自然，还有这个常态的风险而生活。
So in the culture of Amis, actually their calendar surrounds not only harvest and festival, but also typhoons. So he's giving examples on our slide number 3. You see the 3 period of time, which is August, September, and October. And actually in October, Polismun, it means that you have to prepare for materials to construction and in September, there will be house building. And in October, there will be a lot of ceremonies and festivals to not only celebrate, but also to worship the gods for the next harvest.
这里你要换页。
Okay. Sorry that we didn't switch here.
Okay. 当然我们还是遭遇到很严重的风灾的经验。2001年的时候，台湾的光复乡，桃枝台风的时候，淹没了一个村庄，那个村庄1/3都被淹没。那当时总共27人死亡，25个人失踪，然后8个人就受伤。那在1年后呢，我家收到一份遗产。也就是这个受灾的丧失生命的这个对象，我家收到一份遗产，就来自于这个部落。
Okay, here we are showing you the pictures of how landslide and floods happen in Taiwan. And because they are Chinese characters, so we are going through to the next slides. Here you'll see there are several different typhoons, like typhoon Toraji, typhoon Suder, and also you see people are many of their homes are buried in muds, and it's very hard for them to clean up all these messy muds and lots of different garbages. And for Namon, they one day after the typhoon received an inheritance notice saying that one of their very far away relatives lost their life, his or her life, because of the typhoons. So it's very hard to believe, but it's a true experience.
好，2011年88风灾的抗争，当时我们的政府给我们的灾民只有一项选择，也就是说第一个他没有充分让我们知情，然后我们也没有自主的选择权，然后要求我们从山上移住到永久屋里。那假设你离开了家园之后呢，你原居地就会变成不得开发的特定区，我们就不准我们回去。那如果你留在当地的族人呢，就会被断水断电也就是说政府让我们自生自灭。在当时88风灾完之后呢，曾经提过需求的有3400多户，但是最后只有核定2000户。重建预算真正的执行率只有68%左右，但是当时政府会要求原住民族在他的原乡先出示所有权状，这是不符合我们当时居住的样态。
Okay, you see here there are pictures where when people are protesting, and that's because in 2009 there is Typhoon Rocket or we call it August 8th typhoon or catastrophe. And after that very devastating typhoon, many people lost their homes. And many of the indigenous people, they live in mountains. But because of the typhoon, they were forced to leave their home because the government think where they lived is not safe anymore. But the government only give them one choices, actually two, but most of them cannot really choose. One is that they have to live in what the government call permanent house in other places where they are not familiar with. And if these indigenous people, they don't choose to live there, they cannot go back to their home. But the other issue is that many of the indigenous people, their culture, in their culture, they don't have the idea of personal belongings or personal lands. They all share their lands together. So they didn't really apply for the certificate of ownership of the lands or ownership of the house. So the government said, if you want to live in government house, you have to show us the certificate, but many of them cannot. So execution rates of these, the so-called permanent house are very low, like only 60%. So you can imagine 40% of the indigenous people, they don't know, they cannot live in their permanent house and they have to save themselves after the typhoon.
从巴黎协定至今，我们各个会员国，我们可以看到，面对气候变迁，那些无效的、侵害的，或是不正义的、不公的分配程序，或是环境殖民主义，就一一都浮现。那也因此，我们可以从 COP26 可以看到说，当时格拉斯哥决议文里面可以看到，要求我们必须仰赖原住民族，并承认原住民族的权利。然后认为将原住民族纳入国家的气候计划跟金融的决策是应该的。那以及 COP27 里面特别说到的重要议题就是气候正义的诉求。那会要求各国将人权标准跟原住民族政治的参与充分纳入这个谈判里头，避免说原本应该由资本家承担的责任被转嫁。
Okay, here Namo is especially mentioned COP26 and 27. For COP26, there are many resolution or decision about indigenous people's rights should be considered into when it comes to strategy making. Indigenous people's culture and rights should be incorporated into climate plans and financial systems. And COP27
也对。
Okay. And for COP27, climate justice is mentioned, and it's always very important that indigenous people's ways of living should be considered.
我们反观我们台湾的气候变迁的法制化，台湾的气候变迁法更着眼于企业、财团以及国际竞争的考量、经济的考量，以及它内部的绿色能源的这个法条的设计。但是我们回头看，德国看守这个媒体所公布的这个气候变迁绩效的指标 CCPI， 会看到台湾在60多个国家当中是倒数第3名，是一个极差的评比。但是在内法化的时候，却忽略人权的公正作为。
Okay, here you see there is CCPI. It's a way of evaluating the performance of each government, including Taiwan. And Taiwan ranked very low it's like a 57th out of 60 countries. And from the perspective of NAMO, when our government are considering climate change issues, they focus much on corporations, on international competition, on industrial transition, but they usually ignore human rights.
我们可以看到台湾在国际上会很积极的去营造一个帮助者的角色，它会跟各个国家签订不同的气候变迁的合约，以及捐款跟援助计划，甚至跟我们的欧洲银行签订伙伴关系，但是我们也期待我们台湾政府能够将这样的积极关怀的精神落实到自己的岛上。因为身为同样的南岛民族原住民来说，在国家内的法律并没有看见原住民权利的只字片语。
Okay, from this picture, this is mainly about Taiwan government, their diplomacy, the way they express their diplomatic friendly target is to help establish some funding for countries like, for this case, it's Marshall Islands. And not only the fundings, but also they help our government help the signing of the cooperation and also partnership between the bank and this project. But from NAMO's perspective, the government didn't spend the same amount of energy on helping the indigenous people within the islands, even though the government tried, but the more direct way is to write or to establish some new laws that directly outline the standards of how the government can direct the funding to really practically help indigenous people.
那原住民在台湾的法治的困境下，所以我们一直持续主张，第一项是我们要求我们的国家在法律里面必须承认原住民族的主权以及自然资源权。第二项希望能够在法制上面纳入原住民族的决策权利。第三是相关的气候变迁计划跟先取得原住民的咨商同意权。第四是能够设立原住民族的气候变迁基金。第五是能够赔偿过去民族为了台湾经济做的公共牺牲，以及我们守护山林所累积的历史碳汇。然后最后能够将这个资源投入在我们的民族以及部落，做我们气候变迁的调试。
So here are 4 different dimensions of the advocacy of indigenous people in Taiwan. And one of the very important message here is that actually for the past few years, the government are emphasizing on FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent. And so Nama was saying that this should be something important and to implement it in so many ways. And because we really outlined the details here, so I'm not going to go through them words by words, but you see indigenous people, because of where they live, because of their culture, actually they preserve so many beautiful places and lands for Taiwan. The government hasn't really been considering them and equal to have conversation and dialogue. So this is what they are hoping for.
Alay kita hadini bani aku alay.
Okay, thank you everyone. That's all for our presentation. Bye-bye. Oh, not bye-bye here. Sorry.
Thank you so much for that. That was really we went from floods to droughts to fires and now to typhoons and storms and landslides. That was and what really struck me, what really moved me was this indigenous perspective that you brought into it, because it is so important. It is absolutely very important. So thank you very much. We're actually over time, but I still wanted to leave room for the attendees to be able to ask questions, because all 4 speakers or 5 speakers gave such powerful presentations, so different, such a tour around the world of the climate crises, but also so important. So if there are any attendees who would like to ask a question of one or all of our speakers, this is your opportunity. You can put it into the Q&A or you can raise your hand. and we will give you permission to speak. Please bear in mind, keep the questions short. There might be others who would like to speak. And also, please be respectful in your questions and be polite when you ask. If there's anybody who is, I'm going to allow, oh, Eva put her hand up. Does anybody have a question? If not, then I will exercise my moderator rights and ask one question. Oh, Eva, are you trying to raise your hand? Oh, I see a question in the Q&A. So we will ask that. So the speakers, how connected do you feel to others across the globe with similar local disasters? If anyone wants to speak to that.
Namo wants to answer.
Okay. Namo and Naomi.
OK，
So, yeah.
台湾原住民，我觉得台湾在基础建设上面，实际上是做得很好，所以在遭遇到地震或风灾的时候，对于抵抗的韧性其实是还蛮强的，所以即便每年都有那么多台风跟地震啊，那我们在于这个伤害的状况之后就降到最低，但回到部落里头，就会相对都市有很大的落差，就是它的资源还是非常少，没有钱，然后没有坚固的房子跟道路。
Okay. Okay. Nama was saying that he believes that in Taiwan is considered developed country, so their infrastructure should be mature enough to be resilient to typhoons. But still, there are gaps between city people and indigenous people, and he believes that this is somehow a very common phenomenon around the world. Okay, that's all. Right?
Thank you.
Okay.
Naomi?
And, you know, it was really, really beautiful hearing from people all over the world today, because so often in Canada, one of the biggest things we hear as Green politicians here is Canada isn't the problem. This is caused by third world countries. The climate crisis is not a Canadian issue. Well, we can now see that Canada is causing emissions due to our forest fire situation to the rate of CO2 emissions of 100 other countries. And we can no longer hide behind that lie. And I too find that in Saskatchewan, especially in central Canada, even people who live in the cities have strong ties to their rural roots. And rural people everywhere always relate to stories of people in small villages and farmers. And so when I saw the pictures of the typhoons and the floods and in Africa, the droughts, I mean, at my farm, we have lived those problems. You know, like we had one year where it flooded so bad that I had to swim through mud so that my baby trees wouldn't die. And so, you know, it's a universal situation that we can all relate to. And I think that we are all one people.
Thank you. I don't know if Thomas or Sylvia's representative want to speak to that. Okay, if not, oh, Thomas?
I was just a moment. Yes, please remind me of the question. I've just lost my train of thought there.
No, that's fine. How connected do you feel to others across the world with similar local disasters?
Yes, no, thank you. It's interesting because just about 30 minutes before we went into this webinar, we were looking at the events unfolding in Libya. where you have 10,000 people missing and 2,000, more than 2,000 confirmed dead from the flooding there. And I mean, it's the least possible location one would have imagined, when one talks about flooding. You see, previously these events it took place almost in a disconnected world, whereby first, because of lack of connectivity or communication, people could not really relate to the impact. But now we are almost taking part in these disasters on a real-time basis. And I think for us here, we have become more aware. I think there's a whole generation coming up that is now more aware of the fact that the climate, we can wish it away, we can argue it away, but the impact of climate change is self-evident, and it is clear that it is not something that is going away. So to that extent, I believe that it is something that is impacting us here. We have food challenges. Previously, we would get our food from other African countries like Zambia. Kenya is a corn-eating country, or maize, as you'd call it here. Zambia's production, because of climate vagaries, has dropped 30–40%. So has South Africa for the non-GMO varieties. So all of a sudden, even if you have the money, there is no food to be purchased. Livestock feed, the soya and the sunflower cake, you're not able to access this anymore from the neighboring countries because the production has dropped all around. So there is a very, very, very clear correlation between the quality of life, and then that goes to inform peace and stability. We have a lot of, for example, we have a ranch where you're having people coming in from as far as Somalia into Kenya to graze. This is leading to increased human-wildlife, human conflict. And of course, there's an element of human-wildlife conflict surrounding that. So if you look at the impact, there is a very, very steady escalation. If you look at the refugee crisis from Somalia into Kenya, if you look at the conflicts taking place in places like Ethiopia now, it will not take you more than a minute to link it back to food, water, animal feeds, and nature and nature-related resources. So it is very much alive to us now that these events are actually not just interconnected, but are now increasingly becoming apparently so. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you very much for that. I'm now going to promote Dorothy to speak. So Dorothy, if you want to ask your question. Dorothy, are you there? Okay, Eva had asked the question, but Eva had her hand up, but then she posted it. Eva, did you want to ask your question, or did you want to have me ask it now that it's been posted? Oh, okay. Let's try Dorothy again. Dorothy, what about now? There you
Yes. Let me leave this phone down and use my computer. Yes. Mine is not like
Dorothy?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Yes, I was saying mine is not a question, it's just a supplement on what other people have said. First of all, I thank Myra Thomas. I thank Sylvia and Naomi and the gentleman from Taiwan, but I'm going to dwell a lot on what the gentleman from Taiwan said. Yeah, he mentioned that during the climate change decisions, they forget about human rights. And this is true, and it's very important. You cannot separate human rights from climate change or climate crisis, because human rights have got everything to do with climate change. For example, if we talk of health rights, we talk of women's rights, all are affected by climate crisis. So human rights should be really considered when doing anything about climate crisis. And also, indigenous people should be considered at every level of climate change decisions. Why? Because the most people who are affected by the crisis. Why? Because they are dependent on natural resources. And with the climate crisis, it is the natural resources which have been attacked. They depend, even for medicine, they depend on natural resources. During COVID times, it is the indigenous people who taught us how to use herbs to treat COVID, and it worked for us. I ran away from that very quickly because of time, and I'm not the only person speaking, but I'm going to talk about what Thomas said about the funding. He said there was misuse of funds, because most of the funds go to administrative costs for NGOs. I am very sure we've been to these climate change conferences, COP28, 27, and all they consider when they fund is those big NGOs. They don't consider the women groups, the grassroots women groups who really suffer and who do the hands-on climate change solutions that can help. So it is really very much in order to consider them and follow up about the funds they make. Loss and damage, every other thing has been funded, but loss and damage has been talked about, and everything has been left on paper. And yet, in most cases, the people who suffer are the ones who contribute less to climate, to the greenhouse emissions. But when it comes to the loss they get after the climate crisis, they suffer, and the governments are so reluctant to press for the damages and losses. My
Thank you,
God,
Dorothy.
this I should stop here, because when I start talking about loss and damage, I might waste a lot of your time. I would like to continue, but I don't think I have that time.
Thank you so much for your thoughts, Dorothy. We don't have a lot of time left, but that was very important thought. Thank you. So Eva had posted a question. Have the connection between the climate change and the need to change economic systems come to the political table? Does anyone want to speak to that? Anybody?
Please repeat the question.
So the question, and then Naomi first, have the connection between the climate change and the need to change economic systems come to the political table? Go ahead, Naomi.
I think that we can all agree at this point that capitalism and neoliberalism are an astounding failure, and that it's not serving people at all. It's serving profits to the detriment of the entire planet, and impoverished people are being hurt the most. We need to completely revamp our entire economic system and put people and the planet itself ahead of profit. It requires a fundamental change in the entire way that we go about doing business in our day-to-day life. It's an unequivocal failure, our current system.
Thank you, Naomi. Does anybody else want to speak to that? Thomas?
Yes. Well, in the case of Africa and Kenya today, we have just come from the inaugural Africa Climate Summit. It's a massive initiative by all accounts, considering where we're coming from and how climate politics have been executed within the continent. There was a very strongly worded declaration, and we would want to see, for the first time, we have leadership that is somehow alive to the impacts of climate change. I think what needs to happen, and what a role that bodies such as ours would need to play, a little more, is to bridge the gap, the knowledge gap. A lot of people think of climate change and they think of trees. And if you look at the discussions we have had here today, you can see clearly that there is a whole range of issues. There is human rights, there is food security, there is conflict, there is wildfires. Wildfires, we have fires here, but not nearly to the scale that we have seen, for example, in Maui the other day, or what happens in Canada and in America. So it's very clear now that our politicians are coming to this space. And more importantly, I think there's a youthful generation that is coming up, especially in Africa, more alive to topical issues such as climate. And I believe that it is time to also to increase the efforts and the support for this participation within the broader political discourse. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do Nemo or Sylvia's representative want to speak to this as well? Yeah?
Yeah, we would like to briefly answer the question, try to provide our perspective. For Taiwan, because Taiwan is a export-oriented country. So when we are dealing with this climate change issues, the attitude of our government is that we have policy to achieve net zero, to restrict carbon emission. Yeah, but by so many ways. One is that we have carbon tower, like we try to keep up with the CBAM, all the rules. And the law is mainly to save trade problems. Anything you would like to add? Okay. Sorry, I'm going to translate.
OK， 那回到能源资源上的时候，台湾做的方式，举例说我们的绿色能源光电的设施，最后都回到原住民族的土地上面，反而侵害了这个我们的土地的权利。
Okay. So our government it's like the way they try to approach is like spot by spot. It's not like a very overall systematic strategy. So one of them, the other way is that green energy becomes very trendy in Taiwan. So our government tried to plant so many solar panel farms in so many places, but this also leads to what's they call conflict issues between land justice of indigenous people and green energies, the trend of green energies. So we don't think that the government can really leave the ideology or the concept of capitalism and developmentalism. Yeah, but they are trying to keep up with the world. That's all for us.
Thank you very much. And I'm afraid that that's all the time that we have today. I want to thank all the speakers once again. And speakers, please don't log off yet. We wanted to take a panel photo before you all go. But I wanted to thank you all for this very rich and inspiring and really kind of an alarm too. So that, I mean, we should have had that wake up call a while ago, and we did, but we weren't waking up. And hopefully we will get to the point where we will wake up. And what you've brought really done well in bringing home to all of us is we're almost running out of time. We can see it all around the world, and even though they're very different climate disasters, the end result is the same, and we all share the same world. So I want to thank you all, and I want to thank all the participants for having been here, for listening, participating, asking amazing questions. Thank you so much. If there's any other questions, we still do have a series of webinars coming up leading up to COP28. So please join us once again for the next one. We will keep you informed about the next few that are coming up. So yeah, I see some applause. So thank you very much, everybody. Speakers, if you could turn your cameras on so that we could take a panel photo for everybody.
Okay.
You have it?
Just a minute. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. So you have a lot of thank yous in the chat. You were all fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to the organizers and all attendees.
Yeah, it's been very inspiring for us to talk about these issues and prepare for this presentation. And thank you very much for Lucy and Allison preparing for this event. Yeah, it's very hard work.
Well, it was really amazing for us too to hear all of the different perspectives. As I said, the Canadian wildfires I'm most familiar with, but to not only hear about all the different climate disasters around the world, but how they're all linked together at the end, how the results are all shared no matter where you are.